Welcome to Homeschooling Outside the Box, the podcast that encourages and equips moms to homeschool an outside-the-box child. Hey there, I'm Cindy Renna, and thank you so much for joining us. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing somebody I am so impressed by and have had the privilege of meeting personally. His name is Raun K. Kaufman. He is the author of the book, Autism Breakthrough, and he is also the former CEO of the Autism Treatment Center of America. He is an international lecturer and graduate of the Ivy League's Brown University with a degree in biomedical ethics. Raun has completed lecture tours in the US, in the United Kingdom, in Ireland, the Netherlands, Belgium, Sweden, Norway, Spain, Portugal, Poland, Romania, France, Japan, Singapore, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Vietnam. So he's been around the world, literally. And he's been interviewed by media such as National Public Radio, BBC Television, Fox News, the London Telegraph, and People Magazine, and by the most humble, yours truly, as well today. Raun, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Cindy. Appreciate it.
Well, Raun, I know we gave listeners kind of the canned bio of you, but I love your story so much that I really wanted you to share. I want to hear it right from you, not the back of the book cover story, but like the real you. So a quick background about you and your story.
Let's start with, where it all really began, because my parents, they had me when I was, and they I had two older sisters at the time, and they really noticed some pretty profound differences with me right away. I mean, there was a lot of things where as a very young child, I would cry incessantly. Literally round the clock. And then I started getting really severe ear and sometimes throat infections. One of them was life-threatening. Coming out the other side of that, I was very, I didn't develop any language at all. I had no eye contact. I was completely cut off and sort of enveloped in my own world or my own universe. And then I started doing these behaviors that I think for your listeners will be very familiar. I'd rock back and forth, I'd move my fingers in front of my eyes. One of my favorite things to do was to take a kitchen plate and to spin it on its edge, like the top on the floor. I'd do that over and over again. And so, my parents took me to panels of experts, different experts all over. And I was diagnosed with severe autism. And when I say severe, again, they were told, my parents were told that I had IQ below 30, that I was a really severe case. Again, I had zero language, zero eye contact, and I was doing these behaviors over and over again. And so they were more problematic was the not just the diagnosis, but what became the prognosis, like all the predictions my parents were told about all the things I supposedly, wasn't going to be able to do or accomplish. I wasn't going to ever be able to talk or communicate, make friends, go to school. They said I was never even going to really prefer people over objects. And then long term, I was never going to graduate high school or graduate college or live on my own or have a job or laugh at a joke because I understood why it was funny or say I love you. Certainly never get married, have a family, anything like that. This was just off the table, not in the cards for me. And my parents did something, really amazing in the face of all that, right? That's such a tsunami of just challenge to get. And they turned their backs on all these prognoses and predictions. And they took me home and they developed their own child-centered, home-based program that they called the Sunrise Program, but they spelled it S-O-N because that was their son, you get it. and they obviously now we work with boys and girls and men and women. But, at the time, this was the first one. And they were developing this program to try to, not simply to help me, but actually to really reach me. Like they knew I was behind this veil and they were like, how do we reach him? How do we get behind that veil with him? And so even at the very beginning, they were starting with some quite groundbreaking approaches. So for instance, my mom would see me spinning plates like I was describing. Now, keep in mind, she was told to take the plate away, say no, stop me from spinning plates, try and redirect my attention. And actually keep it, again, since we're talking about the 70s, it was a lot worse than that. I mean, this was in the age when they were hitting these kids with electric cattle prods to give them extraordinary jolts of electricity that really were used as, in a sense, punishments. They weren't called that; they were called aversives. But the idea was to discourage these behaviors. They were locking these kids in closets. They were tying their wrists to the arms of armchairs so that they couldn't flap their hands. In fairness, I do regard that as abuse and torture, but also in fairness, that was certainly not their intention. They weren't trying to be abusive to these kids. They were trying to help these kids. They thought this was the way to help them.
Right. And if I can interject too, this
Yeah.
was not just hearsay. I mean, your parents toured the country and went and saw these places and saw
Oh, yeah.
these were the quote unquote cutting edge ways to treat autism in those
Yes.
days.
Yeah. This
That
wasn't
was
something someone told them. No,
right.
you're right.
I want to be clear about that. Yeah.
That's a really, really good point. They went and saw it for themselves. Because look, you get a diagnosis like that, and you're like, I want what's going to help my child. I want the best treatment out there. So
Yeah.
they went and looked at what was the best, most cutting edge treatments that we're doing right now. And this is what they saw, unfortunately. So again, when I say my mom was told to take away the plate and stop me, that was the most gentle thing she was told to do.
Sure.
And I got to tell you, I thank God every day for this, that she didn't listen to them and that my parents didn't listen. And you know what my mom did is when she would watch me spinning plates, she'd get her own plate. She'd sit down next to me and she would spin a plate with me, her own plate. And I mean, this was completely out there at the time. In fact, when people saw this, they said, this is the worst thing you could do. This is worse than doing nothing, because at least you're doing nothing. You're just leaving the kid there. But this was the language, reinforcing the very behaviors you're trying to change. He's going to do it more, which my mom found that part pretty funny. She's like, more than 8 hours a day, 8.5 hours a day? I think I can handle it. Right. But in reality, that's of course not what happened, which the more she did this, the more I became interested in her. I started looking at her more. I started moving physically closer to her. The first time I ever smiled at her and really looked at her was when she was doing this. And then I started to climb a little out from behind my veil and let her in to my world. And there started to be a connection there. And that's what started. That wasn't the whole program. That didn't, magically fix everything. But what it did was it opened the doorway for connection, because my parents realized something that nobody realized. And unfortunately, I would say the dominant paradigm for autism treatment still does not truly get this, which is that autism is not a behavioral disorder. It's a social relational challenge at its core. Our kids totally behave differently. Of course, that's part of how they get the diagnosis, but that is a symptom. That's not a cause. And so, like, if someone's scratching their arm over and over again, you can try and stamp out the quote scratching behavior and how do we get rid of the scratching? Or you could look closely and see, hey, there's a mosquito bite. Maybe if we put some anti-itch lotion, we can address the actual cause, the issue that's going on. And then, by the way, then the person who we put the anti-itch lotion on, they're grateful instead of feeling deeply attacked and alienated, and they don't need to scratch anymore. Right. So what my parents were really seeing is, hey, this is a social relational issue at its core. There's other issues here. There's sensory issues. There's rigidity and flexibility issues, but this is coming from this core of social relational difficulty. And so they said, like, how do we change his behavior? How do we create a relationship with this little guy? How do we do it? And how do we get him to want to create a relationship with us, to really want to, not be forced to? And so the joining was the first step in that. They called it joining. We still call it joining in the Sunrise program. It's not the only step, it's the first step. And we take any child, adult, teenager, and we actually join them in the very behaviors, so-called repetitive behaviors or so-called stims, that everyone else is trying to stop or redirect. We actually join them in that. And contrary to what some objectors have said, it doesn't make them do it more. It actually opens doorways. It makes them more interested in us, more comfortable with us. And here's the crazy part: even though we take zero actions to try and stop the behavior, they do the behavior. The more we join, the less they do these so-called stims. I keep saying so-called because we don't even call them stims. That's a word that came out of the late 60s. It has a lot of baggage of like, it's a stim. How could we stop it? The
Right.
other thing is it actually it's a shorthand for self-stimulating behaviors. And another thing we realized, hey, guess what? That's almost never what's going on. It's almost never a self-stimulating behavior. It's almost always a self-calming behavior, a self-soothing behavior. And so anyway, so we call them, and my parents called them isms, like ISM, isms, like autism. And so when we see a child or adult doing an ism, we join in with that. But it's not about copying. It's not about, hey, look, little guy, I can show you that I can do exactly what you're doing. It's actually about building a relationship around a common interest and speaking our kids' language and actually saying to them in a really tangible way, hey, I love you. And guess what? That means I love what you love. Something's important to you. If you're doing it for hours every day, that means it is important to you. It's important to me. I'm interested in what you're interested in. I value what you value. I care about what you care about. Right? That's what it is. And that's what my parents did. That's what we've now been doing. I've personally been doing it for well over 20 years. The Autism Treatment Center of America has been doing it for just about 40. And so this is really, this is the profound first step. But I do want to say, so my parents did that. There's connection that was formed. And then there was a lot more to be done after that. They built activities that weren't trying to teach me just things like counting or saying a particular word, but teaching me and helping me stretch socially and stretch how much I was interacting with them. And they built all of those activities. This is an important component of the Sunrise program as well, around my interests and my, what they called motivations. So if I really liked animals, they'd build a game around animals. If I really liked numbers, they'd build a game around numbers. And if I really liked physical play or wrestling, they build a game around that, right? So this is interesting because what often happens is people try and teach our kids by using rewards. They say, okay, the kid doesn't really want to do this, so I'm going to offer the child a piece of their favorite food, or I'll let them play with the toy they really want to play with after they do the thing that I'm requesting compliance with. And so this is, I feel, and my parents feel, we feel that this is sort of a turning everything on its head in a way that's not helpful and is actually quite counterproductive. It usually leads to the child or adult actually really hating and not caring about what you're trying to teach. They're just doing it to get the end point, to get the little reward. And it actually creates a lot of very robotic behavior, which many people think robotic behavior is a symptom of autism. And I have to tell you, it is not. It is a symptom of someone with autism who has been bombarded with the reward principle in a really excessive way. Then they tend to exhibit robotic behavior. But actually, I've worked with a lot of kids and teenagers and adults on the autism spectrum who are still severe, have a lot of challenges, but don't have any robotic behavior if they've never been exposed to the reward system. And so they really built these activities around things that were interesting to me, not as the reward, but as the key part of the activity. You know what I mean? If I'm trying to teach someone to count to 5, instead of doing this thing where I say, count these 5 circles, then actually instead we say, oh, you like dinosaurs? Let's have a dinosaur battle. And we'll pick our teams of 5 dinosaurs each. And so the counting just ends up becoming an incidental part of an activity that's already interesting and fascinating to the child. So I know I'm diving into some pieces here, but just to give you an idea, there was a lot that went into this. We even have something now called the social developmental model, which has very carefully plotted out 5 stages of development that we help people achieve with their children. And those are based on what we call the 4 fundamentals of socialization, which are verbal communication, nonverbal communication and eye contact, interactive attention span, and flexibility. So there's a lot of there's a lot of building blocks we do, but we can only do the building blocks, and the building blocks are all social, by the way. We can only do the building blocks when we have the child's willing engagement, when they're not alienated, when they're not defending themselves or feeling like they have to defend themselves from us, and when they are actually open to us and feeling trusting of us and connected to us. So they did all this. I'll just say the ending of the story is they did all this for over 3 years with me. I ended up emerging from my autism really without any trace of this diagnosis. And I went on to live what I think everybody might call a regular life or normal life. And had friends that had no idea about my past and went to regular schools. Like you said, ultimately graduated from Brown University. And now it's really magnificent because when I travel around the world and when I get to connect with these parents, it's really amazing to help people in the very same way that I was helped, and to sort of help them help their children cross the bridge that I crossed. So it's very, very, very meaningful work for me.
Oh, it's such a wonderful story. And I know Ron just gave you kind of a crash course on the Sunrise program. So if you're at home listening and you're floundering around trying to piece together this big program, don't worry. You don't have to get it all from this episode. I've talked extensively about the Sunrise program. I've interviewed 2 other teachers. So I'm going to link to all that in the show notes. So if you want to know more specifically about the Sunrise program, how to get started and all that, we will definitely have resources for you at the end. But I really wanted Ron to sort of bookend it for us and tell us, where he started and where he is now. And Ron, my next question for you, with all that being said, everything you just told us, and I love how you have embraced this, because you can imagine there had to be kind of 2 roads for you at some point. There had to be like,
Absolutely.
okay, enough of being like the poster child of autism. I want my life to be about more than that. But then there's this other beautiful road, which is the road that you've chosen to take, where you've embraced that was a part of your story. It was a part of your parents' story. And then instead of sort of turning and trying to distance yourself from that, you have chosen to continue to pour into this community and help others. So what was it, or how or why did you end up deciding to be involved with not just the autism community, but specifically the program developed to help you, and now you're paying it forward?
It's such a, I've done, as you can imagine, thousands of interviews. I pretty much never get asked that question. That's a good question. No, it's powerful. And I have to tell you, I had that whole thing you described as this is not my whole life, I don't want this to be my life, is exactly how I felt for the first maybe 25 years of my life. And I don't mean that I didn't have a resentment about it, more just like, that was great. I'm proud of that story. That's awesome. That's my childhood. That's my parents' thing. I'm moving on. Right. And that's how I always thought. I had zero intention to come back and do this work. Zero. As a kid, high school, even college and university. No. So it's actually, I had a kind of transformative moment or group of moments when I was about 25. And it was really, I was working in Southern California, actually out by Newport Beach, and having a great time. And there was a sort of shift internally at the Autism Treatment Center of America, and my parents had let these people go that had been helping them. And I had heard about it. I wasn't deeply involved, but I was sort of heard about it. And I talked to my parents regularly on the phone at the time. So this is happening, and then I just sort of had this. I'm continuing to do the work. I worked at this kind of cool educational center that was in Southern California, and I ran this little center there. And I was thinking, I'm like, this may be the only time right now, right this very moment, might be the only time in my whole life that I can help my parents for all the stuff they did for me, not only when I had autism, but even after that, help them in a way that will be meaningful to them. Like, of course, I could say I love them. I could buy them a gift, but like, they're doing fine. They can take care of them. There's nothing they need from me, right?
Right.
And so, but now they had this moment that they hadn't had before, where there was this like sort of hole in the organization. They really needed some help, and I was like, I could help them. I could come back from California, and I could really help them. And at the time, even when I was doing that, it wasn't like, I'm going to change my life and go into autism. It was more like, I'm going to give them a year or two of my life, like you said, sort of pay it back or pay it forward or whatever. I'm going to do that. And so I did that. That's what I did. And my parents, they didn't try to push me at all. They were like, hey, you don't have to do that. That's like, we're really touched, but stay in California if you want to be in California. And no, it was a really powerful feeling on my part. So I went home and I did that. And 2 years in, I was like, this is amazing. Like, I'm deeply touched by this work. I'm deeply touched by all the families I'm working with and the kids. So then I'm like, I'm going to stay another couple of years, just another month, just a little more. And that was, more than 22 years ago. So yeah, I got really, really emotionally involved in it. And then I also built out I did different things to contribute to building out and improving and changing the program. So then it became even more like mine, in a way that felt like that, still theirs, but also mine, And
Right.
so it was, yeah, it's been really, and as you were said in the intro, like, I've gotten to travel to pretty much every inhabited continent and talk to and help different families and kids. And it's been super meaningful for me. I'm really grateful that it turned out this way. But also, I'm looking into some other things I've been working on that has to do with extrapolating some of what I've been doing to help people on the spectrum build relationships,
Mhm.
to address larger issues about how we human beings with or without autism form relationships, where issues come up with that relationships. I actually feel like a lot of what's going on in the United States right now,
Oh.
um, is people see it as a political issue, and I actually don't.
Yeah,
I see it as an actual relationship breakdown issue. And
absolutely.
so I feel like you can't solve it unless you start solve the thing on. It's actually the same thing with the Sunrise program, right? You can't help someone
Yep.
with autism if you're attacking the symptoms and not addressing causes. And the same thing is true on a larger scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're listening to this later on, just know that it is November 7th when we're recording, and we still don't know who's president because our country is just up in the air right now. So definitely, I love, and I think that's why the Sunrise program is so effective, because it gets to the root of humanity. And it kills me because these radical techniques that you guys have invented are exactly how, and not to undermine or underplay the importance of what you've done, but for the critics who come along and they're like, well, this is a very radical way to deal with people with autism, it is exactly how typical people connect. I just appreciate you guys so much for seeing things in a different light. Typical relationships happen when connections are formed. And you like that? I do too. And C.S. Lewis has this great quote. I'm going to butcher it, but I'll put it in the show notes. But it's something to the effect of friendship occurs when one person says to another, you too? No way.
Ah,
Like, I mean, when
that's
that
great.
connection.
I absolutely love that. Yes, please send me that quote. That
Yeah.
is great. I haven't heard that before. That's beautiful.
It's so good, but I really want to get specific with you today about the teen years. And so I'll put all the links to the Sunrise program in the show notes. You guys can look at those after. But if you have a teen who is on the spectrum, whether they've been diagnosed, like mine, our diagnosis journey started 10 years ago now, which feels so that feels so long ago. I feel like, wow, I cannot believe it's been 10 years. But now I've got emerging teens and, lots of other friends who are sort of in that boat. And it's so funny because being a mom of kids on the spectrum, that autism looks very different at age 3 than it does at 7. And you sort of think 7 is like old in the autism world. And I think a lot of that comes from the misinformation that many of us were given. And I don't know if they're still given, but I know it was definitely communicated to me early on that I kind of had a window in the brain's plasticity, in terms of therapies and changes and impact, sort of capped out around 7, 8, 10. Like those were kind of whatever I was going to do, I needed to hurry up and do it in those years. And so there's this pressure. And so then when they get into the teen years, I mean, even at our beloved Sunrise program, most of the parents there have younger children. And so it's almost like we stop talking about it. And I don't know exactly why that is. And I would love your thoughts, because it's almost like we either know what we're going to do about it and we're doing that. We're not really out there looking for new information, or we've kind of plateaued and become complacent in some ways. We're sort of like, well, this is just how it is. And I remember meeting a mom very early when my first son was diagnosed. So he was 3 or 4 and I was on fire. And we were gonna, we're not gonna eat gluten ever. And I'm gonna read all these books and we're gonna go to these therapy training. And, you're just on fire about it because it's new and you feel powerful and impactful. And I asked her out to coffee because I wanted to just know, what do I do? What's this path going to look like? And she listened and she smiled, and she had probably an early teen. Her daughter was probably 13 or 14 at the time. And I said, oh, and there's this, and you got to read about this. And when I stopped, she sort of looked at me and she said, there's just an age and a time where you realize this is just how it's going to be. And I remember feeling so deflated for her, but then also for me thinking, well, it's not going to be like that for us. We're going to, and just the whole idea of hitting an age where you just go into this complacent acceptance. It's different than like an unconditional love acceptance. And so I personally think it might have something to do with that. Like it's kind of old news almost. But what are your thoughts on why you don't hear a lot about autism in the teen years, but why we should? Why should we keep that conversation going?
Well, it's such an important subject. First of all, it's funny you should say that about your experience when you came to the Autism Treatment Center, because I have a private practice now where I work directly with people outside the Autism Treatment Center, although I still also work with the Autism Treatment Center. But in my private practice, almost all now of my clients right now have teenagers or adults. So actually, that's most of who I'm working with right now.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Talk about your question though. Your question's a legit one. So why is that? Why it does get talked about less, that's for sure. I think that's why people are excited to work with me about that, because they're tired of that. They want someone who like really believes in what's possible for their child and like has approaches that aren't the things they've been hearing the last 10 years, all of this, right? So let's talk about a few things. First of all, the biggest problem I think that's going on, and I actually don't even know that, I'm not saying that never happens, the complacency you're talking about, but I don't think that's the biggest problem.
Okay.
The biggest issue is the hopeless kinds of messages that go out. Now, look, when I was younger, all those hopeless messages went out for kids of all ages. Look, I had a parent of two 2-year-olds, and they said, you should start now looking for a group home. There were two 2-year-olds, but she had barely started it. She had just been diagnosed. She hadn't started anything with them, right? So by the way, she ended up doing the Sunrise program. Her kids are doing amazing. But this is, so there was always this hopelessness. And unfortunately, in some pockets, more than pockets in a lot of places, I've been to a lot of countries and states in the US where this is still the case, even for 2-year-olds. Mm-hmm. But what has happened, which has been wonderful, is that over the decades, that sort of weight of hopelessness that's been communicated to families has lifted in some areas for the younger kids, where people are like, oh, well, your 3-year-old is capable of more, and which there's no downside to that. That's great. Let's open up all possibilities for our kids and adults. But for teenagers and older, there's still this thing of like, all right, you took your shot.
Right.
Now you got what you got. Right. And by the way, I want to back up a second and say, you got what you got is not some sort of, it's meant as a bad thing, but actually from my point of view, it's not a bad thing. What you got is actually someone who's creative and interesting and thinks about things differently and is quirky and actually, I believe, has an incredible amount to give the world and to provide. So I'm not here to try and like, let's wipe autism off the face of the earth. Right. I actually think there's a lot of beauty and amazingness that comes from people on the spectrum. I don't want to stamp that out. And one of the beautiful things that's happened with the neurodiversity movement has been this, which is often teenagers and adults on the spectrum that are at the tip of the spear on that, right? Because the ones who can more communicate, right, in a way that others can understand, they've spent their whole life being sort of no offense, kind of crapped on, not
Yeah.
intentionally. No one was intending to do that. That's their experience of it. Being a lot of them actually feel like they've been abused, even if that was not the intention of the person trying to help them, and traumatized and off told over. You've got it. It's not okay. You got what you got is like a great. Yeah, it's. Oh, let's fix this. This is like, oh, let's right. So I think they've brought something amazing to the table, the neurodiversity movement. And then I think, like all movements, right? There are some people in it that then they're so in a defensive crouch from being assaulted
Hmm.
that they then come to this place of back off, don't try and get us to change in any way. And I think that can turn into a mistake as well, which is just leave us alone. Now, if somebody is a 17-year-old on the spectrum and they want to be exactly as they are, I want us to respect that. But
Right.
but at the same point, just like there's lots of people that might want to work and improve different things they're having struggle with. Maybe someone who has a reading issue, maybe they have dyslexia, and they want to. It's not that they want to stamp out their dyslexia, but maybe they want to be able to read more easily, or read read more, or do right. So
Sure.
the same is true on the social spectrum and on the social relational spectrum. Maybe a lot of these people on this, I know for a fact that they do, actually, because I work directly with them. They want to grow in different ways. They want to
Yeah.
learn things that they're not great at right now. They want to be able to form relationships with people. They want to be more understood. And part of being understood is being able to communicate with people so you can make yourself understood. Right. So it doesn't mean they have to stamp out everything. Right. It's about growing what's there.
Right.
So, but I want to come back to this. This is so there is still outside the neurodiverse community, just in the regular neurotypical community, there is a sense of hope. Oh, it's too late. They're 15. What are you going to do? They're 22. I mean, come on. What's done is
Right.
done. And by the way, I got to tell you, I hear that about 8-year-olds. I've heard parents being told if they can't talk by the time they're 7, they're never going to be able to talk. And
Right.
it's like crazy. It's this you mentioned the word neuroplasticity, and you're absolutely right. The brain is plastic, yes, at 7, also at 17 and 27 and 37 and 47.
Yeah.
There are 78-year-olds that have strokes, lose their ability to speak, and then learn to speak again. So, right,
Right.
the plasticity is that the brain's ability to grow in response to stimuli. That happens at all ages. We had one of the very last things I talk about in my book, Autism Breakthrough. The last story at the end is about this person named Jarir. I changed his name, but that's the type. He has a name kind of similar to that. And he was 33 years old,
Hmm.
and his mother was from the UK. They lived in the UK, and his mother came to the US to come to what's called the Sunrise Program Startup. It's like a 5-day intro program that, by the way, the Autism Treatment Center still offers that live online, even during the coronavirus, right? But anyway, she comes to that time it was in person, and her 33-year-old has now been in like a facility, like an institution, for most of his life. He speaks a few words. He doesn't really look at people. He's mostly in his own world. And she gets so excited about what she learned. She goes back home. She takes him out of the home, takes him home with her, and starts working with him. And 18 months later, a year and a half later, she's starting at 33. She didn't do anything till he was 33. So he's 34 and a half. And he's speaking in sentences. He's looking at people like even like the way a neurotypical person would, super connected, can interact for long periods of time, like is really in a different place. And I feel like I say it, the reason I tell that story last is because it's like, this is what our kids and adults and certainly our teenagers are capable of. They're capable of incredible growth and blossoming, but we have to be, that doesn't happen by magic, right?
Right.
We have to be willing. Neuroplasticity is the growth of the brain in response to stimuli, not spontaneous growth of the brain. We need to be the stimuli. We need to be the thing that's saying,
Right.
hey, you can take more steps across the bridge if you want. Let me help you. Now, I will say this, and I'm assuming we'll talk, you and I, Cindy, will talk more about this right now, but a lot of what I've been trying to help people focus on is people who have verbal teenagers or older, doesn't not limited to, but let's take especially teenagers. If you permit me, I'm just going to switch gears a little bit off your
Yes,
question.
no, let's please, because that is actually not to cut in here, but that is where I'd like to focus, because I think it's even in the teen years or adult, even your story and my husband, when he was at the training, him and I both did this in-person training, which was fantastic. His roommate he's thinking the guy's the grandfather or something. No, I mean, his son was in his 30s and he said, I just want to be able to talk to him. And those stories
I love that.
melt your heart, and
Yes.
you swoon and you love it. But what about the teenager who is highly verbal, but only wants to talk about Minecraft and Star Wars and does not want to make friends? Let's switch gears and talk about our kids who are verbal, because I do think there's a lot, and these are probably a lot of the people who are coming to you. I'm so glad you're doing that. They want to grow and change and just don't, they might be fearful, on one hand, and then they might just not have the skills, or they might get into, I know in our family, we have lots of situations where you say, man, I really would have, I think you should have said that differently. They don't realize till after the fact. And I think there's a lot of people in this world who may or may not be on the spectrum or might not understand where they come off to the world as maybe rude or short or distant, and that's not even what they're trying to convey to the world. And they would like to change that, but they're just not sure about how to navigate that social. And that's where I love you guys say it's not behavioral, it's a social relational. That is the true
And
heart.
that's never, actually, Cindy, that's never more true. Like not more true. It's always true, but it's never more visible. It's never more verbal teenagers. Because a lot of times if you have a 5-year-old and they're nonverbal and whatever, thinking, oh, but they're behind in math, and but autism is not a math disorder, but sometimes it's hard to see that when your child isn't doing anything that they're, in quotes, supposed to be doing. But with someone with a 15-year-old on the spectrum, the way you were describing, it's easy to see, because they display all the traditional trappings of intelligence. Now, by the way, I don't think that means they're more intelligent than that 5-year-old who's pre-verbal at all. It's just that they display the trappings of intelligence that our society is used to. The person's smart, they might be really good at math, they might be incredibly verbal and in a very eloquent way, in their way, right? But you can really see, it is the social relational stuff that's holding them back. That's the thing.
That's sometimes the only thing that's the issue, right? So they could surely get by. I'm sure my husband works with tons of engineers who are fully capable to function in society. And I love that's a part in your book too. Like he could, this one story you tell, he could do all these things, these flashcards, these math, but does he have a best friend? Does he laugh at your jokes? Those are the connections that are lacking.
Let me say this. One of the problems that our teens run into is that, let me just outline a few different things I'm seeing come up a lot. So number one is, out in the world, if you, again, I'm just going to do a little comparison here, but like if you're a 5-year-old who's flapping into her hands in front of their face and not speaking, the world knows that person is different, right? You say, that my child's on the spectrum, or even if you don't say it, there's a lot of sense of like something different is happening here. Yeah. Right? Now, sometimes they're still not treated nicely by the world, a lot of times, but I'm just saying there's at least a baseline you're working with. Oftentimes with verbal teenagers on the spectrum, what happens is everyone's like, what's your problem? Hello, you're fine. You can talk. You can why don't you behave? Don't be rude, blah, blah, blah. Right. I'm not saying the parents are saying this, but the world is kind of saying this, right?
Sure. And sometimes the parents.
Sometimes the parents, sure. But there is this sense by the world of you're like, what's your problem?
Yes.
You know what I mean? Of because they're not displaying all these other things.
Right.
So it sort of seems it's actually, in a way, it seems more behavioral to a lot of people. And that leads to the next thing I was about to say, which is then the way that people tend to approach this. And this, I definitely include parents, educators, helping professionals tend to approach this is, we need to get this kid to behave, man. I mean, he or she can talk and do all this, and maybe they can even do their schoolwork in some instances, but God, they got to stop with the comments. They got to be able to talk about other things than Power Rangers, or Star Wars, like you said, right? They've got to not curse in front of people or say, quote, inappropriate comments. So we just got to so then it becomes really behavioral. There's like a resurgence in this behavioral obsession. We've got to get them to behave the right way that other people are comfortable with, right? And this is a real concern of mine because it's exactly the least helpful direction to go in. The reason why your teens on the spectrum are doing what they're doing is not because they're misbehaving. It's not because they're behaving wrong or even just behaving in the behavior isn't the issue. Remember, and this I say, so the behavior is the symptom. The behavior is not the cause and it's not the issue. If you tackle the cause and the issue, then actually the behavior fixes itself. I don't think it's broken, but the behavior sort of, the ship rights itself. But if you attack the symptom, what you end up doing, and I say attack the symptom by telling that teenager to behave differently, scolding them, punishing them, having them, making them practice the right behavior. Now, remember, what do you say when grandma says that to you? You say thank you, and then you ask her how her day was. Like all of that, it's all behavioral stuff. Yeah. And it all goes in I think the least helpful direction, because what happens is you create a push-pull with that teenager. So now you're creating more conflict, and a lot of teenagers that I see that have, in quotes, behavioral issues are the ones that have been pushed and are now pushing back. They're tired of being hit with a hammer to behave the right way. But they're pushing, and people on the spectrum, as we know, if you're a parent of a person on the spectrum, people on the spectrum, one of their biggest issues, this is why we tackle it in the Sunrise program, is they have flexibility issues. They and in quotes, need things a certain way, right? So they do that. And so if you then are pushing more, now you're a pusher to try and get the right thing to happen. Now you're triggering all the flexibility issues and the rigidities. And so you're actually, even more than with a neurotypical person, you're creating a lot of conflict. Even, I know that's no one's intention, but that's what ends up happening. And you're alienating that teenager. You're setting it up so that they don't feel loved or approved of. Again, I'm not saying that's what anyone's trying to do. I'm trying to talk about it from the position of inside the teen. What we're coming all the time from our position, and we're the adult standing over, and we see the person on the spectrum, and we see what they're supposed to be, what we think they're supposed to be doing, and what they're not supposed to be doing, how to fix that, right? But we don't often spend the focus and time. What's it like if you're inside? What's it like if you are that person? What does it feel like when they're constantly told, don't say that, don't do that? What does it feel like when they're told to do things that they don't want to do or that don't make any sense to them? What does it feel like when they're punished for things that they're just doing the best that they can? What does it feel like when no one ever wants to talk about the issues that are important to them? Like, might be Star Wars, it might be vacuum cleaners, and everyone's like, let's move on. What does that feel like when it's happening every day? Right? Think about this. Even if you're a neurotypical person, you can imagine that. You can imagine what that might feel like, having a life like that, right? So this is about, hey, let's turn this around. Let's turn the whole thing around. Let's approach this with that sense of understanding of what it feels like from their point of view, and with our understanding of what being on the spectrum really is in this social relational challenge. So one of the things I've been doing a lot lately is actually literally having phone sessions with teens on the spectrum, teens and young adults on the spectrum. I've done tons of those. And there's a bunch of things I do that are really different than what people would think. So number one, I never try to push the teen away from the subject that they're trying to talk about. I don't say, okay, but what about talking about school? Or what about, hey, you didn't ask me how I was. You didn't remember, when you start a conversation, you got to say, how are you? I never do that stuff, right? And I actually, if they're really into Star Wars, I become a Star Wars freak. This is actually part of joining, right? So I first I build trust and connection with this person. I show them that I'm really on their side. Not that I'm faking it, by the way. I'm not trying to play them. I actually become interested in what they're talking about, and I talk about it with them. And I first build a connection there, and I really enjoy it. Actually, it's really wonderful. They enjoy it. I enjoy it. Nobody loses from this. Then what always happens is there's more and more openings for me, not because I forced it, but because they feel heard. So they're not just talking over me all the time. They leave some space, and then I might add something. First, I might add it on their subject, but I might eventually add it on my subject, right? Not as a way to scold them, but just as like, oh, hey, I was just thinking about this. I do that. I don't, by the way, I don't like pepper them with questions when they don't want to be asked questions. We're doing this constant quizzing of our teens, constant quizzing.
Yeah.
What's a this? What's a that? By the way, it's really silly because we both know the answer. They know they're being quizzed. You think they don't know they're being quizzed? Of course they know. No one wants to be quizzed. It's not fun and it doesn't actually teach anything. And it harms the social development, doesn't help it. So there's that piece. That's one piece, which is right going their way. But then there's this other big thing that comes up a huge amount. And I really work on this in my sessions, which is everyone's coming, the adults, they're coming from this tight place of, I don't want them to misbehave and get, it's a nice place ultimately, right? We don't want our kids to get hurt. We don't want them to get in trouble. So we see all the stuff they're doing. Maybe they're cursing, or maybe I'll give you an example that I working with this guy who says he wants to beat up cops. It was early 20s, white guy, but he feels that all cops are racist and wants to beat them up. Now, by the way, for any of you political people out there who are like, that's because of the Black Lives Matter movement, I'm referring to something that happened like 7 years ago. He was actually really funny. He said, I think a lot of white people are honkies. So he would, now, by the way, right, that's in a way, it's a racial epithet against white people. Did I go, hey, don't use language like that? No, I did not. That's the way to shut it down and not help him, right? So I explore, why don't you like police officers? Oh, you want to beat them up? Why do you want to beat them up? Not like, now our natural, I understand this. It's like, like, what if he goes out and punches a police officer? Like, get thrown in jail. I understand that. I get it, man. His parents were worried about that. I really get it, right? I'm not saying that shouldn't be a concern for you, but when you come from that place, then you try and close it down. And what I always see is it makes it bigger, because now you've created this conflict, this push-pull. You've challenged that teen's sense of autonomy. And remember, since they have a flexibility issue, they're going to have to push back, right? So it makes it bigger. While we're trying to make it smaller, it's making it bigger, right? So I have this, so I never get into a fight or an argument with these teens. Never. I never get into, you shouldn't do that. Don't do that. Don't say it. Do you know what's going to happen to you if you do that, right? All that. Never do it, right? And it's really strange for parents not familiar with the Sunrise program at first, because they're like, you need to, are you condoning this behavior? Right. So the first thing I do is I ask them lots of questions about it, like curious questions. Sure. Oh, why do you want to do that? Oh, what do you think would happen if you do that? And then I use this method that anyone, by the way, you're welcome to take this from me if you're listening. I go deeper with it, but I'll give you a surface level explanation. And it's called taxi driver decisional assistance. This is just something it's a name I came up with, but I use it now in my sessions with teens. Taxi driver decisional assistance. And here, this is not something sneaky I do. I say outright to the teen that I'm talking to, this is what I'm doing. I'm telling you right now what I'm doing. I'm acting as your taxi driver. You're in the back of the cab, and you get to it's your life, man. You get to tell me where you want me to drive you. You get to tell me where you want to go. And I'm not going to tell you can't go there. You tell me where you want to go. But because I am the taxi driver and I'm the guy driving and there's traffic lights and there's other cars, I am going to tell you different things and we're going to explore together what obstacles might come up on the road, what might happen from that. It's not a conflicty thing though, because we're working together on this, right? And so I did that. I did taxi driver decisional assistance with this guy talking about being the police officers, right? I asked him about it. I was curious. And then we talked about, what do you think would happen if you did that? And at first, I will tell you, he had a lot of what I would call magical thinking. Magical thinking is like, you think something's going to happen that's like, it's out of the movie. It's not happening, right? So what he thought is, he said, I just they would try to arrest me, but then I would beat them up. Oh, then they would send, and then they'd send more police officers. Okay, well, I just beat all of them up, right? So now that's the magical thinking part. Right. And by the way, the saying I want to punch a police officer is not magical thinking. You can punch a police officer. You're going to have consequences from that, right? The magical thinking is, if 7 police officers tried to arrest me, I'll just beat them all up. Like, that ain't going to happen. Right. But again, I wasn't going, hey, buddy, that ain't going to happen.
But you let them go there. Right. I mean, it's so important to let that full process happen.
and where I'm trying to help, like, what's he trying to have happen, right?
Yes. What's the root?
His end goal in life is not to beat up police officers. That is not his end goal. He means to get where he's trying to go.
Yes, that's the symptom. And you're trying to get, I love it. Okay.
Yeah.
So then what?
He's trying to, one, feel safe himself around police officers. He was scared. That's part of where this is coming from.
Okay.
Right. And also on a bigger, because he was conscious of world events, he wants people to be treated fairly by police. He's a very powerful, this guy that I was working with, very powerful sense of his view of fairness. He felt like that was being violated. It was a really big deal. He once went in his store, a mom was yelling at her 5-year-old daughter. He went over and started screaming at this mom because he felt like this poor 5-year-old is being treated unfairly, right? Yes. And he's a big dude. So anyway, this is important to address, right? This really could get him in a lot of trouble in the world.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I'm not saying like I didn't care about it. Like, oh yeah, go beat up cops. Right. It's not like, but we talked about it. And again, I was his taxi driver. So I was never in conflict with him, but it was my job to tell him about the obstacles in the road. Anyway, we did this. We had several, it didn't happen in one session, but we had several sessions about it. He has not talked about beating up, punching, or hurting a police officer in like 2 years.
Wow.
Right? Has not talked about it. Number two, his magical thinking has really gone down. About police officers, it's gone to zero. He's never said, and he never talks about being able to beat up 10 police officers. Never. And even his magical thinking in other areas is still there a little bit, but it used to be like 80% of what he talked about was things that were impossible. He does it once in a while, but it's not a big part of his communication. So the only way out is through, right? You can't stamp it, stamp it down. Does that make sense?
It makes so much sense. And would you agree that I think so much of us as humans, honestly, but definitely like our teens on the spectrum, they just want to be heard.
You know what, Cindy? Some parents and educators are afraid of that because for this reason. I understand why. Again, I'm not saying they're being crazy or anything. I get where they're coming from. But their thought is, if I open that door, it's going to be, at least now I'm like shutting it down when they're like, oh, if I open that door, it's just going to be 12 straight hours of speaking. Right. Like there's going to be no break, right?
Right.
And I have to just say, this is not what has happened in my experience. And I've been doing this a long, long time. By the way, it does happen at first, because at first they're so happy to be heard. Right. So yes, they are. But remember, part of why they're talking like that over people a lot of times is because they're never allowed to complete their thought. They're never allowed to say everything that they want to say. So when I first let them, yes, they do kind of talk at me a bit, but that is a short-term thing. What ends up happening is the more they feel heard, the less they're trying to talk over me. Not the more, the less. It becomes much more of a back and forth.
Yeah, we've had the very same experience. And it's anytime we go off the rails and things are sort of, maybe they've had too much screen time or we've had too much excitement or things have been tense at home, we'll see more. That's sort of a red flag for us where it'll spike back up again.
I don't know if this was part of what was going on in your house. I do want to say this other piece too, that's, you know what one of the like arch enemies of having a nice time with your teen is rushing, is like horrible. It's a guaranteed recipe for disaster. Even if you don't have a teen, by the way, even if the child's younger, but like if you have a teenager on the spectrum, it's really unhelpful. So if it means getting up an hour earlier in the morning so you're not pushing them through breakfast or whatever, I'm telling you, that might sound unappealing because I know that hour of sleep matters. It is worth it. If you go down the rush road, if you start rushing, then what happens is it triggers all of their defense mechanisms because they're feeling the push of it.
Right.
And so it creates conflict. It's actually usually slows things down. Ultimately, it frazzles you as the adult because you're like, I got to right? So you don't do it's not you can never be perfect, right? You're never going to eliminate 100% of rushing, but if you could eliminate 90% of the rushing, both of your lives are going to be a billion times better.
Absolutely. You're talking to many homeschool moms right now. And so I've always felt we're kind of uniquely positioned to help our kids because we have so much control over our environment. I think it can be a big advantage, but what happens in the teen years is then there's all this pressure to, okay, it's one thing when my kid is 5 and he's 2 grades, and I say this quote in quotes, behind, because anybody who's listened to the show long enough knows I'm not a big fan of grade levels and things like that. But it gets more real. If you're dealing with a younger child, you do feel like you have more time. And then all of a sudden you hit the high school years and you're like, okay, enough playing around with this autism stuff. You got to catch up in math so you can get into college. And we kind of get crazy a little bit. And we take this child who's still not even, and you mentioned the developmental model. I'm going to link to that. It's so, so good. But you guys have to read Raun's book and understand the program before you touch it. But
Yeah.
it's such a wonderful recentering, because it's not about self-care. It's not about math. It's about this social relational connection. And so if you just push a kid through academics, because some of them are highly gifted, I've got one who, that is the low hanging fruit, like you call it, it's then on the other side of that, if you just push a child just to say he did it, but what would you say to the homeschool mom who really is sort of panicking about academics in the teen years, and thinking, that they've got to push their child through this season just in case they want to go to college, or I have to prepare him for the real world. He's got to launch into adulthood, and what is he going to do with his life? And I'm not going to be around forever. And just kind of talk to us about that side.
Okay, absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up. So I really see two halves to that. Actually, many issues that people are facing with their loved ones on the spectrum, there's often these two halves. And the two halves that I often see, and it's really happening in this instance you just articulated. One half is what you call the emotional or attitudinal issue. And second half, which is just as important, is the practical issue of like, what do you actually do? How do you handle it? What do you say? How do you approach it? Right? They're both important, but that first half almost always gets completely neglected. I almost never hear it brought up. And if the problem is, if you have someone on the spectrum, let's just take a teenager in this situation, you have someone on the spectrum and you are panicking, to use your word, you're tense, you're uncomfortable, you're futurizing. That's a big one that just kills you. Like, what's going to happen when I die? You're doing that, right?
Yes.
You're doing all of that, and you start to get yourself panicky. You start to get yourself scared, or even just frustrated. Why aren't they doing the work that I'm trying to get them to do? They have to do their homework. And as you get through all this, you are going to express that emotional state in a bunch of ways that are going to move everything in the opposite direction from what you want. Your emotional state. And by the way, this is true even if you try and cover it up. There's 100 nonverbal ways it will leak out that you cannot control if you're feeling scared or frustrated or panicked. I promise you that is true. And your teen on the spectrum has these antennae up, and they are on the lookout to see if you're agitated or not. There's a real reason for this, because this is another sensory overload that they experience when an adult with them seems agitated, and it triggers their flexibility issues. Both of those, it then turns them into someone, they become more agitated, they become more resistant, they're much less likely to do whatever the thing is you're trying to get them to do. It harms the relationship part of it, because then they trust you less. Right? So all of this creates conflict, really unhelpful. There's no upside. Now you might say, I know I'm not getting that way. I'm not like doing that on purpose to ruin everything. This is just how I feel. And that's why, fair enough. But that's why it's important. I always spend some of my time when I'm working with people. It's important to make this part of what you're working on when you're getting help with your child. It's not only about what you do. It is about that, but not only about that. It's also about how you do what you do and how you feel when you do what you do. Look, it's hard to swallow that, because it feels like, how am I supposed to be calm when he or she is doing X or Y or Z?
Yeah.
Right? I get that. But that's why most people that I work with, they need some help in that area. Sure. What I try and do is, and definitely the Autism Treatment Center does this as well, is help people uncover the beliefs and thought processes and ways of thinking and perspectives that are actually driving them crazy, because it's not actually what your teen is doing. It seems like it's what your teen is doing that's driving you crazy. It's not actually. What's actually happening is your teen does stuff, and it may be challenging. I'm not taking that away. But then you have all these thoughts and ways of thinking about it. And that's what's really driving you crazy. So if we can that's where the choice comes in too. If we can change the way we think about it, change what we think it means, change it that we're not doing a good enough job, all that, then actually our child can still do the same thing and it won't drive us crazy. So the first thing to answer your question, the first half is, yes, I understand they want the child or the teenager to move forward academically and be prepared for life. I don't begrudge them that. I don't think that's terrible, but it's really important to work on this emotional piece of it, because that's what's going to create the roadblock that prevents all the stuff you want from happening. Now, the other half, just as important, is how you approach that.
Yeah.
So that's where you get into things like, if you try and rush through that work, never, ever work. It will never go well. Right. So that's number one. You don't want to rush. Number two is, it's really a heavy lift to expect them to just magically be interested in all of the pointless stuff they're learning in school. And let's be honest, it's most. I say this, listen, I say this as a straight A student
Sure.
who was obsessed with going to an Ivy League college, right? Which then I ended up doing. But like, even then, even while that was happening, I was like, this is useless. and so that's me, who like at least had a goal in mind with it. Like with our teens, just foisting stuff on them, they don't see the point in it. And yeah, that's understandable. Now, that doesn't mean we have to, I'm not saying that means so forget about it, but I'm saying you got to have that understanding. There's no point from their point of view. And in fact, many of these skills they will never use again. Yes, they do need addition, subtraction, arithmetic. They'll use that the rest of their life. Reading, they will use that the rest of their life. Yeah. Do they need to know algebra? They're probably never going to use it again. Never. I've never ever used algebra. Not once.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I'm glad you bring that up, because as homeschoolers, that's one of the joys we have, is we can cater the curriculum. And I think parents will get in their heads like, my child who, in 5th grade is at a 2nd grade math level has got to get to, trig. What I highly doubt, if this child is not already passionately into math in his younger, I really don't know that he's going to pursue a career where he will require trigonometry. So it's about knowing your child.
Unless they're really into math and they become a mathematician, in which case, great.
Sure.
Then they're going to have an interest there.
Then they'll want to do it. So it's about knowing your kid and having the freedom to really pour into their motivations and find something they want.
Yes, Cindy. And that piece you just said about the motivation. So the thing, if someone's concerned, let's say their child's 3 grade levels in quotes behind. Sure. And like you, Cindy, I don't really believe in behind, but let's pretend that that's how they're evaluating it, right? So they're doing behind. So then my thought isn't, how do I catch them up? Yeah. My thought would be, if I were trying to approach this as a homeschooler, and by the way, if you're a homeschooler, it's like tailor-made for the Sunrise program.
I know.
The first thing we tell a lot of people is take your kid out of school for a while. But let me say this. So I wouldn't be thinking, how do I catch her up, right? I would be thinking, how do I get her to really get interested in this learning process? I need to get her interested in that. I need to get her to care about that. That's the only way the catching up part's ever going to happen anyway. Right. I need to find ways. And if I'm a homeschooler, there's a lot of freedom to do that. I need to find ways. Let's just say I have to teach algebra. Again, I think a lot of that stuff is useless, but I understand you need it to get through high school. Fair enough. But then I want to think, okay, not how do I catch them up to algebra? I got to make algebra interesting. I got to make the whole learning process interesting so they don't see it as a chore. And then I have to make algebra in particular interesting. I have to create silly games around them. I have to make whole activities that are connected to stuff they care about, right? If they love Star Wars, my whole algebra time with them is going to be around Star Wars. And I can build math. So they're trying to get the Millennium Falcon from here to there. If they don't get there, this is going to blow up. And then I put math in there. Yes. Right. Yes. So I'm not just on the paper. People think, oh, I just turned the math problem into a Millennium Falcon Star Wars issue. It's more than that. You might have to turn the whole game into something active. Right. Because again, for a lot of our teens, sitting in one place in a chair for 2 hours, not great, right? So I may turn it into an active game where we're moving around the room and we make big cutouts of the Millennium Falcon. We draw it and we create, like, there may be, I gotta be willing to think outside the box, which again, if you're homeschooling, we're already
outside the box.
You're already outside the box, right? Yeah, but the world, even if you're a homeschooler, the world's trying to impose the box back on you.
Yes.
Think about where they need to be by age 15. They're still trying to do that to you. You got to be mentally strong and be like, I know you're trying to get me to think inside this box. I get it. I'm not going there. I'm staying outside the box, right? Because that's the way that my child's going to learn. And more important than any particular thing they learn, that's the way that they're going to have a longer term thing where they enjoy the process of learning. If they don't enjoy the process of learning, then the second you stop, it's going to stop anyway. So they got to enjoy that process, and that also means they have to enjoy people. And by the way, even more important than how well they do in any particular subject, if they can interact with people, that has a huge effect on where they're able to go in their life.
Yeah.
But even if you are a mathematician, let's say your child's integrated and they become a mathematician, that's what they do. That's great. That's awesome. You still need to be able to interact with people. You can't be a mathematician that has zero interaction with humans. That's just not how it works, right? So that's why all this keeps coming back into play, all the bigger issues that I keep trying to bring up. I feel like a lot of what I struggle against when I'm trying to help someone is that people are really focused on the small picture. How do I get them to stop cursing? How do I get them to learn this algebra problem? How do I get them to pay attention? How do I get them to stop talking about Star Wars? Blah, 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 right? How do I get them to say thank you? Not that any of those are useless, but they're small picture. And what ends up happening is we focus on the small picture. We get fights ultimately around the small picture. We get alienation around it. And we sabotage the big picture. What's the big picture? The big picture is a teenager who can have a nice relationship with me and with other people, who is interested in learning, who's interested in connecting with people. That's the bigger picture. And the good news is if I address the bigger picture, the small picture is very easy to address at that point. But if I address the small picture, I usually sabotage the big picture. So I'm trying to always get people like, hold on a second. I know you need that. I know you wanted to brush your teeth. Get that. I'm not saying that's pointless, right? If you get into a huge fight over the brushing the teeth, there's 10 other things you're going to sabotage. Let's get trust going. And then yes, brushing teeth. If you have a teen who's trusts you and is relaxed about things, brushing teeth doesn't have to be a big deal.
Right.
But if you're in a fight about the brushing the teeth, you've now sabotaged the relationship, bigger picture.
Yeah. Let's turn the telescope around. Let's look at it from, the other way. Oh, this is so good. I know I've kept you forever. I have one last question though. I could just talk to you all day about this, but how do we wrestle the tension between contentment and unconditional acceptance and helping our child to grow a little bit more into their full potential?
Oh, what a question.
In 30 seconds or less, right?
No, really, I'm glad you asked. It's a great question, Cindy. Here's the thing. I think, like I've said with some other things, there's two pieces to that too, which is the first piece is I really feel like so much of the secret of life, with or without autism, is to not need things to be different than they are in order for you to feel okay.
Yeah.
To be able to love and enjoy what is. And part of what is your child, right? Now, that doesn't mean that's the way it always is going to be, right? I'm not trying to say like, accept this and just leave it be because this is how they are forever. But I'm saying, look, if your child, I'm going to use a 15-year-old boy or girl, this is how your child is right now. Now, that doesn't mean they'll be that way at 16 or 17, but it is how they are at 15. Like, there's no changing that in the moment. Like, that is what you have, right?
Right.
So can you fall in love with what you have? Can you enjoy what you have? Can you embrace what you have? This is what we all want. I promise you, this is what your teenager wants. This is, like I said, this is why the neurodiversity movement was created. Really, people say it's because so that they have job opportunities or whatever. That's a side benefit.
Yeah.
Really, because we all want to be loved. We all want to be respected. We all want to be accepted, right? And you can provide, this is the good thing. No matter where you are, rich or poor, full of ideas or out of ideas, you can do that. If you are a parent, if you are an educator, you can do that. You can give that to your teen, meaning you can show them love and acceptance. You can embrace them as they are. You can even celebrate what they're doing. Like, you can give that. You don't need any resources that you don't already have in order to do that piece. Now, like I said, that doesn't mean anything about the future. It just means something about the present. Now, in the future, I would not let anyone tell me, if I were, let's say, a parent, what my child's future holds. If someone tries to tell you that, you just got to ignore them. I mean, they're entitled to their opinion. They're entitled to live their life. They're not entitled to live your life. Right? So you don't have to listen to that. They're in their box. You don't have to get in their box with them. Right? They might say, well, the studies have shown that if they haven't done this by age 15, great, you go have fun reading that study. I'm not interested in that study. I'm not interested in the evidence that shows me what my child can't do. That's preposterous. I'm not interested. You go look at that evidence. Yeah. Right? So I'm like, look, when my parents worked with me, there was zero evidence that I could change in the way that I changed. Not like a little bit of evidence. None. Right. There was no one that had gone before and done that. Right? So they had to believe in me with no evidence, with no support, with no one going, hey, you're doing a great job. I like this new thing you're inventing. It's awesome. They got nothing but criticism, honestly. Right? and that's what happens. So if you are, if you are the parent of a loved one with autism, or you just have someone in your family with autism, right? Part of your job is to be like a mental warrior. I don't mean to do war with people, but to you be strong when other people are going in another way. And you believe, hey, there's more possible here. There's more growth possible. There's more blossoming possible. There's more relationship possible. And that's true for a teenager. It's true if your child's 35. So the both pieces, there's the not needing things to be different than they are in order to enjoy them, embracing, loving your teenager, right? Celebrating them, allowing yourself to have fun. Everything isn't about teaching, learning, and growing. It's also about relating and having fun and having nice times together. Everyone forgets that, and then they lament the fact that they're having a miserable experience. Yeah, you are. You are having a miserable experience because you have to make that fun part happen, right? That's important. Now, then once you have that, then you can say, hey, but I also believe my teenager's capable of more. I also believe and I'm going to take action. I'm not just going to imagine it. I'm going to take action. I'm going to get the help I need, because I'm just one person. Doesn't mean I have all the best ideas. I'm going to get help from other people, and I'm going to try and do my best to put into action, trying to get that more for my teenager, trying to encourage them to do more. I can't make it happen. I can't force it. I can't make them do something and learn something they really don't want to learn. And that's why part of my job is to help them to want to learn it, to make it fun and encouraging, right? So I think that piece is so important. And I will just say, Cindy, because you mentioned it a second ago, if someone does want help, the 3 top things I would recommend anyone who wants help to do, if anything I'm saying resonates with you, and if it doesn't, that's okay. I love you anyway. It's fine. You don't have to do anything I'm saying. But if it resonates with you, 3 things. 1, go ahead and read the book Autism Breakthrough. It's available everywhere, by the way. It's on Amazon. It's on the Amazon Kindle. It's available as a real book. You can order it anywhere. It's in Barnes & Noble. It's even available as an audiobook with me as the reader. So you get 8 hours of my annoying voice. But it's cool because you can listen in the car and stuff, right? It's got all the same, it's not missing, it's not abridged, it has all the same stuff that's in the book. The book also has specific activities at the end of each chapter to help implement it. And each chapter has its own web page that you can access from that chapter, that shows you video examples and helps you more with whatever technique is illustrated in that chapter. And I wrote it in a very exactly the way I'm talking is the way I wrote the book. Yeah. Just tried to imagine I'm sitting across from a parent who loves their kid and I'm having coffee with them. What would I say to them? And then I wrote 300 pages of that. Yeah,
it is. It's so good. It's the #1 resource. When it says my child was diagnosed, I'm like, this book, this is where you start.
Yes, that's where you start, right? Not where you end. That's great point. So there's the book. Second thing I would recommend is, oh my gosh, totally go to the Autism Treatment Center of America. And when I say go, I don't mean literally go. And right, we're in COVID, right? It's a nonprofit organization, and they have 3 different kinds of programs. They have a live, a 5-day startup they offer a few times a year, where you're literally experiencing it live over Zoom for a Monday through Friday of a particular week, right? That's one thing. It's great. It's a real good jump starter thing. There's something called the Sunrise Program online, where it's a slower, more hand-holding thing. I helped develop this one. It's really, really good. You can sign up for it, and it gives you 9 months of techniques and curriculum to do. Most people do it faster than 9 months, so you could do it faster than that. But you have access to an online library of a lot of example videos with real kids and explaining it, so you can really understand it. I'm one of the teachers in that one. That one's not live. That one's like a pre-recorded one, but I'm one of the people in it. So you can do that. The third thing you can do as part of that thing is they have very specific programs, like a program just on tantruming, a program just on toilet training. And those are live also. Those are like 2-day programs or so that are live through Zoom as well. So if you go to autismtreatment.org, you can see all of that, sign up for it, etc. If you have an important question you want to ask about it, you can even call them and ask them about it, or shoot them an email. Very responsive. And then the third and final thing, if you want to, and I will say I'm being honest, I'm a bit pricey, but if someone wants to work directly with me, they can actually, they can email me directly, which is my first name, which is spelled Raun, even though it's pronounced Raun, Raun 3 times. So it's raun@yahoo.com, which is Raun @yahoo.com. They can just literally email me. First thing I'll do when you email me is I'll send you back a whole document, an attachment that will have all the different kinds of packages that I offer. One of those packages is called the teen package, where I do taxi driver decisional assistance directly with your teen on the spectrum if they're verbal. They have to want to talk to me. I don't believe in forcing it, right? If you insist they do it and you threaten them, get them to do it, I won't do it under those circumstances. They have to want it, right? But you could sell it. Like, meaning like you could pitch it to them like, hey, this is someone who's like interested in the stuff that you were interested, has been where you are, because I've been where they are, and wants to talk to you about it. So you could get them interested in it, but it still has to be of their own volition. And then there's a bunch of other packages I have. I won't go through them, but there's just a bunch of other ones where I work with you, the parent, or you, the educator. And that's really good because that helps you set up some ongoing things, if you're a homeschooler or not, that can be really helpful moving forward. And also you can use it to like address different issues and obstacles that might be coming up in the moment that we can talk about and help you with. So any of those things would be really helpful to do.
It is a full package, guys. I will link to all of that in the show notes. I cannot encourage you enough to do everything that Raun said. We have been nothing but happy with all of the trainings that we've done, the online, and it's just all been wonderful. So thank you so much for being on today and talking about our wonderful teens on the spectrum and just helping us to see things in a really great way.
Oh, thanks for having me, Cindy. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening to Homeschooling Outside the Box. If you are loving the show, please head over to iTunes and leave a review. This is a great way to help other moms just like you find encouragement in their homeschool with their outside-the-box child as well. For more encouragement, be sure to head to cindyrenna.com and you can check out some great blog posts as well as a shop that will help equip you on your homeschooling journey.